Terraria 1.4.4 added 50 new death messages, more than doubling the amount already present in the game. If you've played any Terraria recently, you've probably noticed them. Notably, the new death messages are much more creative in their nature, and a few of them even contain some obscure references. And that's what we're looking at today, Terraria's most creative death messages. Let's start off with player was sent to Ocram's house. Now obviously this is a reference to Terraria boss Ocram, which now only exists on the 3DS version of Terraria, which is never gonna get updated ever. Ocram's house could be a reference to something like Davy Jones's locker, referencing a place where you go when you die, but this is basically pure speculation on my part. Granted that we don't have Davy Jones's locker death messages anywhere else in the game, not even for drowning, I think this is the most likely. So, I guess Ocram is the guardian of the afterlife now. Then we have what I like to call the fancy word death messages, because they use fancy words. These are the exsanguinated, macerated, eviscerated, and degloved death messages. Most of these are terms describing some form of gruesome action. Exsanguination, which is my favorite English word, describes the process of bleeding someone or something out. Ex meaning exterior, and sanguine meaning blood. So, exterior, blood. This root word also gives us the sanguine staff, which just means blood staff. The more you know. Maceration can mean two things, either excessive starvation or some form of separation and degradation caused by liquid. I guess it's the latter in this case of the Terrarian. Eviscerated is just a fancy word for disemboweling, though can also be used to mean someone getting utterly destroyed in some other way. Unfortunately for the Terrarian, it seems like he is actually going through the former definition. And then there's degloved. This is basically when the skin on top of the tissue is torn directly off of it, basically a form of rather violent and sudden flaying. I highly recommend do not search up for images of this on the internet. On a more happy note, we have the death message, player had their home remodeled. I don't have an explanation for this one, unlike the other ones. Clearly, getting your home remodeled for free is a good thing, right? Well, I don't know. What do you think? We also have a humorous death message discovering the meaning of defenestration, which ranks as my second favorite English word after exsanguination. Fenestration simply refers to an opening or window in a building, so defenestration refers to out of the window, i.e. throwing someone out of a window. As expected, being thrown out of a window is a falling related death message. So is free fallin', the only direct reference to pop culture on this list. This is taken from a song called Free Fallin' by American musician Tom Perry, where it is one of the lyrics. Just like the previous death message, it is pretty evident what kind of death message this is. Okay, now we're done with the good stuff. Now, back to gruesome deaths. We have the death message, player had their cap peeled back, which is a colloquial term for being shot in the head. Pretty accurate sometimes. A more lighthearted, but not really death message would also be player was blended into a zesty sauce, which apparently is a type of sauce at Burger King. It doesn't actually contain meat IRL though, thankfully. Player's spine was ripped out is a more vanilla death message, but might be a reference to the famous finishing move of Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat. The death message had both kidneys stolen shows how the enemies of Terraria always have so many gold coins lying around. Turned into long pig is actually not a slang term, despite how weird it sounds. It is actually an old term meaning human meat. It was coined by explorers who observed cannibalism among native tribes in the islands of French Polynesia, and is supposedly a translation from a similar word in the island's native tongue. Then there are also a few idiomatic death messages, mostly centered around death. Being sent to the farm is a pretty generic colloquial term for being killed or dying in some way. It is typically used for pets, where parents say a pet was sent to the farm or some other pleasant rural place to try to soothe their children after a pet's passing. In this case, it is used for a human, which is more macabre. Was put on the wrong side of the grass is a rather obscure reference to the idiom to wake up on the right side of the grass, which means to still be alive. In this case, to be forced onto the wrong side of the grass is basically to be killed. To pop one's clogs is a somewhat humorous British idiom meaning to die, typically suddenly. It originates from the practice of selling someone's clogs after they die. The bone zone is a colloquial term for an area I can only assume contains various sexual actions of the phallic variety. If you get licked by the wall of flesh somehow, you might notice a new death message that accompanies the licked death message. Player got the first base of the wall of flesh. While this may confuse people who don't know how baseball works, getting to first base is an American idiom that means to move through the initial phase of something, basically to complete the basics. However, I think Terraria is likely referring to the secondary definition of the idiom, which refers to sexual intimacy, i.e., a kiss. So you got kissed by the wall of flesh. Looking at that mouth though, I can't imagine it is a very delightful experience. And yeah, that's all the interesting death messages in Terraria. There are many more, but most of them are pretty boring, so I refrain from mentioning them in this video. These may be small parts of the game, but as a trivia man, it's my job to dig up useless shit like this. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see if I get demonetized like last time. Hello, thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed, I ask you to subscribe, as we are relatively close to 90,000 subscribers. Either way though, thank you for watching, and good day and goodbye.